This all began basically at 1 p.m. Local time here with a 25-minute speech by Olaf Scholz, where he was really sort of putting out his sort of stakes in terms of what he would like to do with another term as chancellor. Then a 2-hour debate by all the lawmakers in the Bundestag. This is a pretty spirited, I would say, campaign event, and a campaign, generally speaking, by German standards. It's been fairly personal. It's been quite vicious at points. I mean, Olaf Scholz was talking about the FDP. That is the party that had the finance ministry. He fired his finance minister because of disagreements over the budget. He's saying that basically they're morally unfit to govern. Merz, for his part, the head of the CDU, Angela Merkel's traditional party, said that, Scholz is a failed chancellor. And then on the other side of things, on the far right, you have the Alternative for Deutschland, the far-right group that has 20% of the vote going into this election, saying that basically Germany is on the brink of collapse, and a vote for Friedrich Merz and the CDU is a vote for war with Russia. So that's some of the flavor of what we had today. And after that, we had these lawmakers going forward and putting forward and voting against Olaf Scholz's government, as it turns out in the end. And this is the last step to basically Olaf Scholz to go to the president of Germany to basically dissolve the government and basically pave the way for that election that is slated for February the 23rd.
All right, let's fast forward to February 23rd. Is there any expectation of how this may go? Talk to us about what are some of the options for the German people?
Yeah, so what you have right now is the CDU, the conservative center-right party of Germany that is basically leading the polls really since the beginning, and for a couple of years now. They have about 31% of the vote. What is interesting and what makes this election quite a bit different from ones in the past is that you have the Alternative for Deutschland, again, the really quite far-right party in Germany, with number 2 spot with 20%, basically a fifth of the German vote. That has not happened in really post-war Germany at all. So that is sort of one of the sort of clear issues there. And the thing is that nobody will work with them, basically. No coalition is possible with the AfD. This has been made clear even by, the conservative parties within Germany. They just won't basically touch it. Then Olaf Scholz has been closing the gap a little bit on third place, and that basically sets us off for a grand coalition, CDU, SPD. This is something that has happened a lot in history. Merkel, had this arrangement. In fact, Olaf Scholz was the finance minister under Merkel, under that coalition. The issue that brings is that may bring some of the same problems that we had with this government, which is massive disagreements on how to spend money at a time when the German economy is really limping. There is zero growth, and as a consequence, as we're learning in France as well, when you have zero growth, you don't have as much money to play with. You have budgets that bring down the government.
Here's my totally unfair question to you, Oliver. I'm just wondering, in what capacity in Europe has snap elections ever worked? I'm genuinely trying to think back, and it seems like a lot of times the individual in power thinks that it will help cement a mandate at some point, and that's why this sort of eventually evolves. But it never seems to work.
Well, so listen, that's what makes it. That's the sort of distinction between the German snap election and the French one, right? The German one is basically forced because they basically fired one part of their coalition government and basically kicked them out of government and no longer had a mandate to govern. So they just basically had to do it. This is not going to go well for Olaf Scholz. That is clear. The Macron one was a bit more of a wild card, really a kind of, really a skydive into sort of political uncertainty, and a really, I think, seen by most as a real miscalculation because it did not go at all his way, and we're seeing the sort of consequences of that. To say when it has worked, only because I was reading about this today. If we have to go back to the 1970s, I can give you an example of Willy Brandt in the sort of west of Germany. So that was one to sort of consolidate some power. But I have to say the last few, certainly this year, have not really gone that way for these leaders.
And Oliver, you were mentioning about the AfD, the far-right party, now roughly 20% of the votes. I'm not sure you can ignore them anymore. How can a coalition government ignore 1 in 5 voters?
Well, this is a very interesting part of the debate, and I think it's something that we've seen across the political spectrum in a number of different countries. Arguably, you've had this happen in Italy. You have Giorgia Meloni, who was once really considered a sort of pariah, the sort of brothers of Italy. She is now Prime Minister of Italy, and in some ways the European leader with the most powerful mandate in all of Europe. You're seeing the same thing happening in France with Marine Le Pen, who, for a very long time was basically totally ignored by the political establishment in France, and that is no longer an option. The question is, when does that come to Germany? Of course, the issue with Germany is that comes fraught and laden with much more political charged issues from the past, and basically with the far right and the sort of history of fascism that has occurred in Germany. This is a very sensitive topic for the Germans and for many people in Germany, which is why you see a lot of protesting in the streets against this party. But again, increasingly something that just cannot be ignored.